Chapter 1. The Minotaur returns. Percy Jackson's heart pounded as he sprinted through the dense woods, the familiar roar of the Minotaur echoing behind him. The beast was relentless, crashing through trees and underbrush with brute force. But Percy was no longer the inexperienced demigod he once was. 12 long years of constant battles had honed his skills, turning him into a demon on the battlefield. Most monsters avoided him now, too fearful of a quick trip down below, but Mr. Horns has a personal grudge to settle with Jackson. As he dodged a swipe from the Minotaur's massive hand, Percy's thoughts wandered. This was supposed to be a simple journey home, a brief respite to celebrate his birthday with his family and friends. He had been looking forward to it, a rare moment of peace amidst the chaos of his life. He spun around, slashing Riptide across the Minotaur's leg. The beast howled in pain, but Percy barely flinched. His mind drifted back to the past 7 years. After the defeat of Python and the temporary peace that followed, he and Annabeth had tried to build a normal life. But the gods had other plans. No matter how many times he saved the world, the Olympians always had another quest for him, each one more dangerous than the last. Each quest had pulled him further away from Annabeth, straining their relationship to the breaking point. Annabeth had eventually moved to Mount Olympus, taking on a prestigious position as an architect, while Percy adopted a nomadic lifestyle. Always on the move, always fighting. The Minotaur charged again, and Percy sidestepped, thrusting Riptide into its side. The beast roared and collapsed, disappearing in a cloud of golden dust. Percy stood there, panting, staring at the spot where the Minotaur had been. Even now he couldn't escape the monsters, couldn't escape the call to be a hero. He sheathed Riptide and continued his journey home, his thoughts heavy. Despite everything, he still felt a deep sense of duty, a need to protect the world, even if it cost him his happiness. Flashback. The last 7 years. Percy's thoughts drifted back to the days after the defeat of Python. For a brief time, it seemed like they might have peace. He and Annabeth moved into a small apartment in New Rome, trying to live like normal people. But the gods were never far away and they wouldn't let Percy rest. Post-Apollo peace. The first year had been the easiest. They had enjoyed the quiet, spending time with friends and family, especially with his mother, Sally, and her new family. Estelle had been born, and Percy adored his little sister. Life was almost normal. Even Zeus, in recognition of all he had done, allowed Percy to enter his domain, flying in peace for the first time in his life. Olympian interference. But then the calls began. Zeus needed him to deal with a rogue giant in Canada. His father Poseidon requested his help in the Pacific Ocean, to try and calm down Pontus, who had grown tired of his oceans growing dirtier and dirtier. Each request came with dire warnings about what might happen if he refused. Annabeth had been supportive at first, understanding his sense of duty, but as the years went on, the constant danger wore on them both. Strain on relationships. Every quest took a piece of him, and every return home felt shorter. Annabeth watched him leave time after time, each departure more painful than the last. She had her own dreams, her own ambitions, but it seemed like the gods always demanded more from Percy. Annabeth's career, then the offer from Mount Olympus came. Annabeth was to design new structures that blended ancient and modern styles. It was her dream job, but it meant living on Olympus and accepting the gift of immortality. Already drifting away from Percy, she took it without even consulting him, as he was on yet another mission, and while Percy supported her upon his return, the physical distance between them mirrored the emotional gap that had grown over the years. Percy would never admit it, but the betrayal he felt for her choosing the life he had given up, to be with her, had begun to eat at him as well. The breakup. Eventually, the strain became too much. They had a long, tearful conversation, realizing that they were on different paths. They loved each other, but love wasn't enough to bridge the divide. Annabeth moved to Olympus, and Percy continued his nomadic life, taking on quests that no one else could handle. Percy's thoughts returned to the present as he approached his mum's apartment. It was his birthday, and he was determined to enjoy it, even if just for a moment. Sally greeted him with a warm hug, and for a little while the weight on his shoulders lifted. Poseidon's visit. As the evening went on, a familiar shimmer appeared in the air, and the smell of the sea filled the room, as Poseidon materialized in the living room. "Happy birthday, Percy," his father said, smiling. He handed Percy a wrapped gift, which turned out to be a beautifully crafted shield made of celestial bronze with driftwood inlays. "For protection, and a reminder that you're never alone." Percy smiled, grateful for the gesture. As he grabbed the handle, he could feel the connection instantly. It was more than a simple shield, but Percy couldn't figure out how. Poseidon smiled with a knowing look on his face. "Push the button," he suggested. As Percy touched the button, the shield morphed into a ring with a trident seal on its head. Percy smiled. "I love it," he said happily. They talked about the sea, family, and old times. Poseidon's presence was a comfort, a reminder of his roots and the love his family had for him. As the night drew to a close, Percy knew this moment of peace was fleeting. The next morning a message would come, another quest, another threat. But for now he allowed himself to enjoy the warmth of his family, a brief respite in his endless journey. Chapter 2. The Summoning. The summons came that night in his dreams. Lightning flashed as a booming voice spoke. "Perseus Jackson, you're needed. Make your way to Mount Olympus with haste." Percy, as ever, decided to keep them waiting. He took Estelle to the zoo the next day, only heading to the Empire State Building the day after that. Percy made his way towards the elevator that would take him to Olympus. The guard barely glanced his way, already used to Percy's frequent ventures to Olympus. It had been 2 days since his birthday. The weight of Zeus's summons were heavy on his mind. He knew he had kept the gods waiting, a deliberate act of defiance born from frustration and weariness. As he made his way towards the throne room, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction at having made them wait, a small act of rebellion against their constant demands. Upon entering the throne room, Percy was met with a mixture of expressions from the assembled gods, some displaying thinly veiled annoyance, while others wore expressions of curiosity or concern. He ignored the judgmental stares and focused instead on the imposing figure of Zeus, seated regally upon his throne. "Percy Jackson," Zeus boomed, his voice echoing throughout the chamber, "you grace us with your presence at last." Percy met Zeus's gaze head-on, refusing to back down in the face of the god's imposing presence. "Apologies for the delay, Lord Zeus," Percy replied evenly, his tone betraying none of the frustration that churned within him. Zeus's expression remained impassive, though Percy could sense the simmering tension that lingered beneath the surface. "Your tardiness is noted," Zeus said, his voice clipped, "but we have more pressing matters to attend to." Percy resisted the urge to roll his eyes at Zeus's thinly veiled reprimand. Instead, he squared his shoulders and prepared himself for whatever task the gods had deemed necessary for him. 2 days ago, you celebrated your birth, an important moment for our world," Zeus began, his tone grave. "But today we have a matter of grave importance to discuss." Percy's stomach clenched as he braced himself for the revelation of his next quest. He knew that whatever task lay ahead would not be easy, but he was determined to face it head-on, regardless of the consequences. "Nyx, the primordial goddess of night, has begun to stir once more," Zeus continued, his voice echoing with the weight of the news. "Her resurgence threatens to plunge both mortal and divine realms into darkness." Percy's mind raced as he absorbed the gravity of the situation. Not Tartarus, he thought, anywhere but there. But instead, he said, "If I'm to go back there, I don't know if I will return. It was pure luck that I and Annabeth made it out last time. I'd have to consult Nico and Uncle H first. Even then I'm doubtful. Nyx was not to be taken lightly. Her power immense and her motives inscrutable." He knew that facing her would be no small feat, but he was prepared to do whatever it took to protect both worlds from her wrath. Zeus ever so slightly paled. Even he, as an elder god and one of the big three, did not enter the pit lightly. Just then, a voice cold and yet warm spoke. "Consult me now, nephew, but not about entry there. The council would never send anyone there, especially a mortal." Percy looked to his uncle and smiled weakly, only now letting fear take him as he no longer needed to be brave. "Good, I am grateful. I feared that would be the request. Anything other than that will be simple in comparison." Hades smiled slightly, imperceptible to all but the few who knew him or his children well enough, and Percy knew Nico far too well to miss it. "What would you have me do, Lord Zeus?" Percy asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. You are to seek out any information regarding Nyx's resurgence, Zeus commanded, his tone brooking no argument. Gather what allies you can, for this task will not be easy. Percy nodded in understanding, his resolve hardening with each passing moment. He may have kept the gods waiting, but he was determined to make up for lost time by throwing himself wholeheartedly into the task ahead. But before he could turn to leave, his father spoke. So yet again you deem to send my son into danger. Nay, not just danger, but certain death. Over and over again you do this. He has given enough to Olympus. Let him rest, brother. Percy hadn't expected this, nor did he expect the sincerity in his father's voice or the anger in his eyes. But before he could speak, Hades beat him to it. Brother, Zeus has come to me. To my very palace he has taken counsel with me about your request. We have both concurred that your desire shall be granted. The three stand united in purpose not seen since the first war against our father. Your request is granted. Poseidon looked shocked. Truly? Zeus answered him this time, and whatever Percy expected, it was not what was said next. You're right, brother. I will follow your lead on this one. After all he has done for us, yes, I concur. Poseidon smiled. Very well. It's settled then. The sea god spoke. What is settled? Percy asked. Not yet, son. Finish this last quest and all will be revealed. With that, Percy knew better than to press it. The meeting was done. As Percy turned to leave, he felt a hand on his shoulder, and he turned to see Poseidon standing behind him, his expression a mixture of pride and sadness. You will do us proud, Percy, Poseidon said, his voice soft but tinged with emotion. Percy searched his father's eyes for answers, but Poseidon simply offered him a reassuring smile before turning away. With a heavy heart, Percy exited the throne room. As he made his way down back towards the mortal realm, he heard his name. Percy! Cried Apollo. Lester! Percy called back, and then he saw her. Artemis was scowling at Percy. Why do you call him that? It's disrespectful, Artemis said with disdain. Sorry, Percy muttered. Most gods he'd give a rude retort or even roll his eyes, but Artemis, well, Artemis is one of the few gods besides his father, Hestia, and Apollo that he respects. Unlike most gods, she's active in the world of the mortals, and she was a friend to Zoe. Be nice, Artie. It's a compliment. It means I've not become the jerk I was, and most gods still are. You okay, Perce? You look sad, asked Apollo. I'm fine, just a memory of an old friend, Percy answered. Who? Apollo inquired. Someone I should think about more often. Strange what time does to you as it passes. Artemis looked uncomfortable and Apollo looked angry. See, this is what I was talking about, Artie. They have no concern for anyone but themselves. Heroes like Percy lose and lose, and what is their reward? More loss. Apollo, Artemis said, exasperated. I just got you back. Please shut your mouth before they turn you into something worse than Lester. I liked Lester, said Percy. Artemis scowled. Of course you did, she said. And I understand your anger, Apollo, but it's for the greater good. That's why they are called heroes. They fight and die so others can live. It isn't fair, but so many people are alive today because of Percy. And what if he dies? Snapped Apollo. His mother, his friends, and Olympus help me. But I'm his friend. I won't lose anyone else. Not like Jason. Why do they have to take from everyone? It isn't fair. He lost Annabeth and a chance at true happiness because we can't just leave him alone. Apollo was getting angry now. Hey guys, I'm still here, Percy said, trying to remind them it's rude to drudge up his personal life. But honestly, I gave up minding a long time ago. I'm content with my fate, Percy said sadly, before waving goodbye and leaving. Outside, the grandeur of Mount Olympus seemed to mock him, a stark reminder of the weight of his responsibilities as both a demigod and a son of Poseidon. But Percy squared his shoulders and set his jaw, determined to face whatever dangers lay ahead with courage and determination. The quest for Nyx had begun, and Percy Jackson would stop at nothing to ensure that light triumphed over darkness and Olympus once more stood triumphant. POV Artemis. Sorry, Percy had muttered, an unusual deference in his voice. Most gods would have received a rude retort or an eye roll from him, but not Artemis. Why is that? Percy respected her, one of the few gods besides his father. Be nice, Artie, Apollo had said, attempting to lighten the mood. It's a compliment. It means I've not become the jerk I was, and most gods still are. Apollo looked at his friend. You okay, Percy? You look sad." "I'm fine. Just a memory of an old friend," Percy had answered, his voice tinged with melancholy. "Who?" Apollo inquired. "Someone I should think about more often. Strange what time does to you as it passes." Percy's voice trailed off, and Artemis felt a pang of discomfort. Apollo's expression had shifted to one of anger. "See, this is what I was talking about, Artie. They have no concern for anyone but themselves. Heroes like Percy lose, and what is their reward? More loss." "Apollo," Artemis said, exasperated. "I just got you back. Please shut your mouth before they turn you into something worse than Lester." "I like Lester," said Percy. Artemis scowled. "Of course you did," she said. "And I understand your anger, Apollo, but it's for the greater good. That's why they are called heroes. They fight and die so others can live. It isn't fair, but so many people are alive today because of Percy." "And what if he dies?" snapped Apollo. "What about the people he leaves behind? His mother, his friends, and Olympus help us me. I'm his friend. I won't lose anyone else. Not like Jason. Why do they have to take from everyone? It isn't fair. He lost Annabeth and a chance at true happiness because we can't just leave him alone." Apollo was getting angry now. "Hey guys, I'm still here," Percy said, trying to remind them it's rude to drudge up his personal life. "But honestly, I gave up minding a long time ago. I'm content with my fate," Percy said sadly, before waving goodbye and leaving. Artemis watched Percy's retreating figure with a begrudging respect. The grandeur of Mount Olympus stood stark against the sky, a symbol of the god's power and the responsibility they continued to lay upon his shoulders. She sighed, a rare sound from her, and turned her gaze to Apollo. "See," Artemis had said, attempting to reassure her brother. "He's fine. You know, sister, it used to be me who was deaf to others' feelings. Looks like we traded places." Apollo had teleported away, leaving Artemis alone with her thoughts. As Percy left, the grandeur of Mount Olympus seemed to mock him, a stark reminder of the weight of his responsibilities as both a demigod and a son of Poseidon. Artemis tried not to think of the troubles she and her kin had added for him to shoulder. But Percy squared his shoulders and set his jaw, determined to face whatever dangers lay ahead with courage and determination. Artemis's mind wandered back to their conversation, and then further back to the first time she had met Percy. He had been a brash young demigod, full of energy and hope. His sea-green eyes had sparkled with mischief and determination. His black hair had been short and unruly, matching his carefree spirit. He had asked her who she thought she was, and Zoe had been offended for her mistress. Zoe! She had befriended Percy, had even gained her blessing in using her old sword. Artemis would never admit it, but the respect Percy seemed to hold for her was indeed mutual. Now, years later, Percy had changed. His hair was long, often tied into a bun, and he sported a thick beard. His eyes still held their characteristic brightness, but they were tinged with a weariness and sadness that spoke of countless battles and losses. The boy she had first met was now a man, a hero, burdened by the weight of the world. Apollo's words echoed in her mind. Heroes like Percy lose, and what is their reward? More loss. She couldn't deny the truth in her brother's words. Percy had sacrificed so much, and the gods continued to demand more from him. Artemis sighed again, a rare sound for the goddess of the hunt. She admired Percy's resilience, but she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She had always believed in the greater good, in the necessity of sacrifice for the survival of many. Yet, seeing Percy, she wondered if they were asking too much from him. She respected Percy deeply, not just for his deeds, but for who he was as a person, as a man. He was one of the rare mortals who had earned her genuine respect, and the list that had earned her respect, who were also men, was well short. But respect did not ease the burden of her role or the guilt that gnawed at her when she saw the toll their demands took on him. Artemis glanced around the throne room, her gaze landing on the empty thrones of her fellow Olympians. She knew they all had their reasons, their justifications for why Percy was the one to face Nyx. But as she stood there, alone with her thoughts, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were all complicit in the suffering of a hero who had already given so much. With a heavy heart she left the throne room, her mind filled with thoughts of Percy Jackson and the unfair burdens he bore. She vowed to herself that she would do everything in her power to ensure that this quest would not break him. Because heroes like Percy deserved more than just loss. They deserved a chance at happiness and peace. Chapter 4. Gathering the Seven. Percy stood at the edge of the woods, looking out over Camp Half-Blood. The familiar sights and sounds filled him with a bittersweet sense of nostalgia. It had been 6 days since his birthday, 4 days since he'd made the gods wait for him on Mount Olympus. Now he had a new quest, a daunting task that weighed heavily on his mind. But first, he needed to gather his friends, the Seven, the ones who'd fought by his side in the most challenging battles. The camp was bustling with activity as demigods trained and prepared for their daily routines. Percy made his way toward the big house, where he knew Chiron would be. As he approached, he spotted Nico D'Angelo standing by the porch, his usual dark attire making him stand out among the campers. "Nico!" Percy called out, waving. Nico turned and gave a rare smile. "Percy, it's good to see you." Percy clasped Nico's hand in a firm handshake, pulling him into a brief hug. "You too. We've got a lot to talk about." They walked together into the big house, where Chiron greeted them with a warm smile. After a brief catch-up, Percy explained his new quest and the need to gather their old friends. "Are you sure about this, Percy?" Chiron asked, his voice tinged with concern. "It's been a long time since the Seven have been together. Their circumstances have all changed. They all live very different lives. They may not come." "No, they will come. They won't abandon each other, not after all we've been through," Percy replied, determination in his eyes. No one said anything about Annabeth and how she couldn't come even if she wished to. They didn't want to hurt Percy any more than he was already. Nico nodded in agreement. "I'll contact the others. They'll want to know what's going on." They spent the next few hours reaching out to their friends. Piper McLean and her boyfriend Jason Grace had once been part of the Seven, but Jason had tragically died in battle. Piper was now living a quieter life, trying to find peace away from the chaos. Hazel Levesque and Frank Zhang were in New Rome, helping rebuild the Roman demigod community. Leo Valdez and Calypso were travelling the world, exploring new places and finding adventure. One by one they responded, each expressing their willingness to join Percy on this new quest. However, there was a noticeable absence: Annabeth Chase. She'd chosen the immortal life on Mount Olympus, trading the life of a hero for a different kind of responsibility. Percy respected her decision, but it still hurt to think about her being so far away, living a life he couldn't be a part of. As they waited for the others to arrive, Percy and Nico walked around the camp reminiscing about old times. It was a bittersweet walk down memory lane, filled with laughter and moments of silence as they remembered friends they had lost along the way. 2 days later, the Seven were reunited. Hazel and Frank arrived from New Rome, their presence bringing a sense of strength and stability. Piper showed up with a quiet determination, her eyes reflecting the pain of losing Jason but also the resolve to keep fighting. Leo and Calypso appeared last, their arrival marked by a burst of laughter and a flurry of hugs. "Looks like the gang's all here," Leo said, grinning widely. "Well, almost," Percy nodded. "Almost. Annabeth won't be joining us. She's got her own responsibilities now." There was a moment of silence as everyone absorbed this news. Annabeth had been a crucial part of their team, and her absence was deeply felt, but they understood her decision and respected it. Calypso looked at Percy, both sadness and anger in her eyes. She remembered their time spent on her island, and all he'd given up to be reunited with the daughter of Athena. He and the others may not hold a grudge against her, but Calypso did. Leo as well. He came to see her point of view once he realized her feelings came from a place of friendship and nothing more. After their many talks during their worldwide adventure, he began to feel bad for his friend and grew rather protective of the son of Poseidon. "We've got some new faces to help us out," Percy said, breaking the silence. "Clarice LaRue and Will Solis will be joining us. They're strong fighters, and we're going to need all the strength we can get." Clarice, the headstrong daughter of Ares, and Will, the skilled healer and son of Apollo, stepped forward. They had been friends and allies in many battles, and their addition to the group brought a renewed sense of purpose. "All right, let's do this," Clarice said, her voice filled with determination. "We've got a world to save." Will nodded. "And I'll be here to patch you all up when you get hurt." Percy smiled, feeling a surge of hope. Despite the losses and the challenges ahead, he had his friends by his side. Together, they had faced unimaginable dangers and emerged victorious. This time would be no different. They spent the rest of the day planning and preparing, each of them contributing their unique skills and knowledge. As the sun set over Camp Half-Blood, they gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and strengthening their bonds. "So, Nico, any rumblings from the land down under?" asked Percy. Nico smirked at Percy's name for his father's kingdom. "Sadly, no, but also perhaps that is good. No mass monster breakout, no rebellions. The underworld is a realm of order at the moment." Percy stroked his beard. "I'd like to say that is good, but perhaps Nyx learned from Gaia. Maybe she's working from the shadows." Clarice groaned. "Really, seaweed brain?" Percy laughed. "Nico and Will should lead this quest. They have the most experience dealing with Nyx." Nico sighed. "We have the most experience running from Nyx, but if that is what you want, Percy, we've got your back, brother." Percy smiled and looked around at his friends, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. They were more than just allies, they were family, and no matter what lay ahead, he knew they would face it together. Chapter 5. Seeking Answers. The Seven, now reunited and bolstered by the addition of Clarisse and Will, spent the next few days at Camp Half-Blood. Their initial joy at being together again was quickly tempered by the seriousness of their mission. They dove into research, scouring ancient texts and consulting the camp's wisest inhabitants to uncover any clues about the rising threat of Nyx. Percy and his friends huddled in the big house library, poring over dusty tomes and scrolls. Nico D'Angelo, always a figure of mystery and determination, seemed particularly driven. He had an idea that might lead them to answers. "Nico, you seem to have something on your mind," Hazel said, looking up from a thick book of prophecies. Nico nodded. "I think it's time we called on someone who might have inside information. I'm going to try to get Nemesis's attention." "Nemesis? The goddess of revenge?" Frank asked, his eyebrows rising. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Nico shrugged. "We need answers, and she might have them. Besides, she has a unique perspective on the balance of power among the gods and titans. If anyone knows about Nyx's plans, it could be her." Percy glanced around at his friends. They were all tired but determined. "All right, Nico, let's give it a shot." They made their way to a secluded spot by the camp's lake. Nico stood at the water's edge, concentrating. He pulled out a gold drachma and raised it high. "Oh, Iris, goddess of the rainbow, accept my offering," Nico intoned, then tossed the coin into the lake. A shimmering rainbow appeared, and Nico called out, "Nemesis, we seek your wisdom. Please, show yourself." For a moment nothing happened. Then, the water rippled and the image of Nemesis appeared. Her stern face and piercing eyes sent a shiver through the group. "Nico D'Angelo," she said, her voice echoing with power. "Why do you call on me?" "We need information," Nico replied. "Nyx is rising, and we need to know what she's planning. Specifically, we need to know about her first strike." Nemesis's eyes narrowed. "Nyx's plans are dark and far-reaching, but I will tell you this. Her first target will be Apetus, the traitorous Titan. You must seek him out." "Apetus?" Percy asked, surprised. "Why him?" "He betrayed his own kind to help the Olympians," Nemesis said. "Nyx considers him a threat to her power. Find him, and you may find the answers you seek." "Thank you, Nemesis," Nico said, bowing his head slightly. The goddess's image faded, leaving the group with more questions than answers. "Who's Iapetus?" Clarisse asked, looking confused. "He's a Titan who sided with us during the last major conflict," Percy explained. "He lost his memory and was known as Bob for a while. But he regained his memory and decided to help us anyway." "We need to find him," Piper said. "If Nyx is targeting him, he might be in danger, and he might have crucial information." The group agreed, and they quickly began making plans to locate Iapetus. Nico used his connections to the underworld to track the Titan's whereabouts. After a few hours of intense concentration and consulting with spirits, Nico found a lead. "He's on the west coast near San Francisco." A murmur of surprise went through the group. San Francisco was familiar territory, but it still posed its own set of challenges. "Then that's where we'll go," Percy said, his voice steady. The others nodded, their resolve hardening. They spent the next few hours gathering supplies and preparing for the journey. As the sun set over Camp Half-Blood, they stood together, ready to face the unknown once more. With a final glance around the camp, Percy led his friends toward the entrance to the mortal world. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but they were determined to find Iapetus and uncover Nyx's plans. Their journey was just beginning, and they knew they would need every ounce of courage and strength to succeed. Chapter 6. The Journey and the Janitor. The journey to the west coast was anything but peaceful. The seven, accompanied by Clarice and Will, faced relentless dangers at every turn. Their path was fraught with challenges that tested their strength, resolve, and unity. Dangers along the way. As they travelled, they encountered a hydra lurking in the forests of Kentucky. Its many heads hissed and snapped at them, but with coordinated attacks and clever strategies, they managed to defeat the beast. Annabeth's absence was felt keenly, but each member of the group stepped up to fill the gap. Further along, in the deserts of Arizona, they were ambushed by a pack of hellhounds. The monster's glowing red eyes and snarling fangs made for a terrifying sight, but the seven fought valiantly. Nico, wielding his Stygian iron sword, sent many of the creatures back to the underworld. The others used their unique abilities to fend off the attackers until the hounds finally retreated. As they approached San Francisco, they were assailed by rogue spirits and minor deities angered by their intrusion. Each fight drained their energy, but they pressed on, driven by their mission and the camaraderie they shared. Finding Bob. After days of arduous travel and battle, they finally arrived at a small community college on the outskirts of San Francisco. Exhausted but determined, they spread out to search for Iapetus, or Bob, as Percy remembered him. It was Leo who first spotted him, mopping the floors in one of the college's main buildings. Dressed in a janitor's uniform, Bob looked surprisingly content, humming a tune as he worked. His silvery hair and glowing eyes were unmistakable. "Bob!" Percy called out, relief washing over him. The Titan looked up, a broad smile spreading across his face. "Percy! Friends! What brings you here?" "We need your help," Percy said urgently. "Nyx is rising and you're in danger. We have to get you somewhere safe." Bob's expression turned serious. "Nyx, that is troubling. But I have made a life here helping people. I cannot simply leave." Before Percy could respond, the air around them grew cold. Shadows lengthened, and an oppressive feeling settled over the college. The sound of growling and the clatter of claws echoed through the hallways. "We're not alone," Hazel said, her voice tense. The ambush. Monsters poured in from every direction surrounding the school. Hellhounds, Empusai, and Dracini emerged from the shadows, their eyes glinting with malice. The seven and their allies formed a tight circle around Bob, weapons at the ready. From the depths of the shadows, a deep, terrifying voice rumbled, sending chills down their spines. It spoke in a language none of them could understand, but the menace in its tone was unmistakable. Even Bob, a Titan, seemed shaken. "We need to get out of here," Percy said, gripping Riptide tightly. "Now!" The group fought fiercely, their combined strength just barely holding the monsters at bay. Bob used his immense strength to clear a path, but the creatures kept coming, seemingly endless. Just when it seemed they might be overwhelmed, Percy saw an opportunity. "This way!" he shouted, leading us towards an emergency exit. They fought their way through, Bob's massive frame shielding them from the worst of the attacks. Outside, they regrouped, breathing heavily. The monsters were still coming, but they had a moment's respite. The voice, however, continued to echo in their minds, a haunting reminder of the danger they faced. "We can't keep this up forever," Calypso said, her face pale but determined. "We need a plan." Percy nodded, his mind racing. "We'll figure something out, but first we need to get Bob to safety." With the monsters hot on their heels and the ominous voice lingering in the air, the group set off once more. Their journey was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. Chapter 7. The Sacrifice. The tension was palpable as the monsters closed in, their snarls and growls filling the air. Percy knew they had to act quickly or risk being overwhelmed. He turned to Bob, his expression resolute. "Bob, you need to teleport half of us to Camp Half-Blood," Percy said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Nico, you take the other half with shadow travel." Bob nodded, understanding the urgency. "I can do that, Percy." "Same," said Nico. Bob and Nico quickly began organising the group. Bob took Hazel, Frank, Piper and Clarice, while Nico prepared to shadow travel with Leo, Calypso and Will. Percy stood at the front, riptide in hand, ready to keep everyone safe. Bob flashed his group out, leaving only Nico and his group. The attack. Just as Nico was ready to shadow travel all of them out, a monstrous claw slashed through the air, catching Percy off guard. The blow sent him sprawling to the ground, far from the rest of the group, too far from the shadow Nico was using to escape, blood pouring from a deep gash in his side. Hazel screamed, and the others cried out in shock and horror. "Percy!" Leo tried to rush to his side, but Nico held him back, his face twisted with pain. "Don't move, Leo! I have to concentrate or I'll kill all of us in transit!" Nico screamed. With tears streaming down their faces, the group reluctantly stepped back. "Get up, Percy," Nico pleaded. But Percy could not stand. "Please!" Nico's voice cracked. "Go, Nico. Keep everyone safe," Percy said grimly. Nico activated his powers, teleporting the demigods away into the shadow. Percy watched as his friends vanished, their desperate expressions seared into his mind. The final stand. Alone now, Percy struggled to his feet, clutching his side. He managed to get to one knee before the monsters closed in, their eyes filled with bloodlust. He could barely lift his sword. He activated his shield and felt the refreshing sensation of the ocean. He raised Riptide, determined to take as many of them down with him as he could. The deep, terrifying voice from before echoed again, taunting him. Percy gritted his teeth, refusing to let the fear take hold. He fought with every ounce of strength he had left, slashing at the monsters as they swarmed around him. The voice materialized. It was a woman in black, translucent. Her black eyes and raven hair shined with a dark light. Light withered and died around her. "Nix," Percy moaned through his pain. The woman smiled. "Not yet, little hero." She raised her arms and the world went black. Back at Camp Half-Blood, the atmosphere was sombre and tense. Bob and Nico's groups arrived safely, but the absence of Percy weighed heavily on everyone. Hazel paced back and forth, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts and fears. Nico, exhausted from the shadow travel, slumped to the ground. "We have to go back," he said, his voice weak but determined. "We can't leave him there." "We won't," Clarice roared, her eyes blazing with resolve. "We will get him back. He can't be gone." Leo stepped forward, his face grim. "We need a plan, and we need to regroup. Percy wouldn't want us rushing in blindly." Bob, his expression filled with sorrow and guilt, spoke up. "I will help. Percy is my friend. We will save him." Despite their determination, the reality of the situation was stark. Percy was in the hands of the monsters, and they had no idea what fate had befallen him. But they would not give up. They would fight, and they would find him. Chapter 8. Tilda Captive. Percy awoke a captor. Strange, he thought he was surely going to be eaten. His head was throbbing, he was wounded badly and losing a lot of blood. He hadn't been taken easily, or without significant casualties to the enemy, but judging by his current state, he'd say they didn't appreciate that very much. His right eye was swollen shut. His left leg and also 3 ribs were broken. Every breath he took was agony and caught upon his lips. "I've been worse off. You'll be fine," he whispered to himself. "Shut it," came a gruff and unkind voice. "Or I'll eat your liver, child of the sea." Percy looked up and saw the biggest cyclops he's ever seen. Now is my chance, he thought to himself. Gather information. Not exactly what I had in mind. I thought I'd have a captive, not be one. What do you want, anyways? What is with these primordials? Always trying to destroy everything. What does Nyx want anyways? The Cyclops looked offended. He struck Percy, causing his other eye to swell up. Watch your tongue, mortal. My mistress will be respected. That's enough now, a feminine voice said. We need him conscious. The lady in black glided to him. So are you Nyx or not? Percy asked. Not, said the woman in black. At least not yet. Percy interrupted her and rolled his eyes. I heard you say that already, remember? Said Percy. Then who are you? I am her avatar. I embody her will and power up here, at least until she escapes Tartarus, that is. Percy shivered. What are you planning? Percy asked. A return to the old ways, the same as all my kin. Gaia, Thanpontus, and now I. Do not think I've forgiven you for what you did to my brother and sister." "Hey, me and Pontus are cool. I convinced him peacefully," Percy stated indignantly. Nick scowled. He always had a soft heart. To content, giving control of his realm to lessers. Poseidon may control the sea, but my brother is the sea. We have watched lesser beings inherit from us, not what we once owned, no far worse, they inherited control of us. Each time you or Poseidon will the sea to obey, you strip away the freedom of choice from my brother. And worse, you have severed the consciousness of my beloved sister. Same as her husband, Oranos. I will not allow this to stand. Humanity, nature, the gods, all these parasites will be wiped clean, and chaos shall rise once more. The age of the Primordials will come again. Her smile was malicious and cruel. I suppose I couldn't convince you to surrender peacefully and return back home to your brother, Percy asked hopefully. No, Perseus, no you couldn't, she sighed, annoyed at Percy's ability to ruin such good melodrama with his folly. Chapter 9. A Hunter's Resolve. Artemis moved silently through the dense forest. Her huntresses spread out in a loose formation around her. The night was unusually quiet, an unnatural stillness that set her senses on edge. They had been tracking the monstrous horde for hours, following the trail of destruction they had left in their wake. She could sense something ominous ahead, something that made even her immortal blood run cold. "Thalia," Artemis called softly, her voice barely a whisper. Her lieutenant appeared at her side, her electric blue eyes alert and determined. "Yes, my lady," Thalia replied, her hand resting on the hilt of her dagger. "Scout ahead. I sense we are close to their camp." Thalia nodded and disappeared into the shadows, moving with the stealth and grace that only a daughter of Zeus could muster. Artemis watched her go, her heart heavy with worry. But she had trained Thalia well. She knew she'd be fine no matter what came after her lieutenant. As Artemis and her huntresses approached the edge of a clearing, the sound of rough voices and guttural laughter reached their ears. She signalled for her group to halt and took a moment to assess the situation. In the centre of the clearing was a makeshift camp filled with cyclopes, hellhounds, and other monstrous creatures. And in the middle, bound and battered, was a boy. "Form up," Artemis whispered to her huntresses. "We strike hard and fast, drive them away and rescue Percy." The huntresses nodded, their expressions grim and resolute. With a silent signal, Artemis led the charge. The huntresses moved as one, their arrows flying with deadly accuracy. Hellhounds yelped and fell, and Cyclops roared in pain and confusion. The camp erupted into chaos. Artemis focused on the largest Cyclops, the one who had been tormenting the prisoner. She leapt gracefully over a fallen tree and slashed at the monster with her twin hunting knives. The Cyclops bellowed in rage. Swinging its massive club at her, Artemis dodged effortlessly, her movements a blur as she struck again and again. "Back, all of you!" came a feminine voice. She emerged from the shadows, her dark eyes gleaming with malice. Artemis turned to face her, her knives gleaming under the moonlight. "You will not harm anyone again," she said coldly. The Avatar laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "You cannot stop what is coming, Artemis. The age of the Primordials will rise again." Artemis's eyes flashed with anger. "Olympus would crush you, but unluckily for you, I found you first." With a fierce cry, she lunged at the woman in black. The two engaged in a deadly dance, their weapons clashing with a sound like thunder. The woman was powerful, but Artemis fought with the strength of a goddess. Meanwhile, Thalia and the other huntresses drove the remaining monsters away, their combined efforts creating a whirlwind of deadly precision. As the battle raged on, Thalia finally reached the boy. She fell to her knees beside him, her eyes filling with tears. "Percy," she whispered, gently touching his face, "we're here. You're going to be okay." Percy stirred slightly, his swollen eyes cracking open just enough to see her. "Thalia," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "You came." "Of course I did, seaweed brain," Thalia choked out, a tear sliding down her cheek. "We all did." Artemis, seeing her opportunity, delivered a powerful blow to the woman in black, forcing her to retreat. The dark figure hissed in frustration and vanished into the shadows, her voice echoing ominously. "This is not the end, Artemis. Your time will come." With the Avatar gone, the remaining monsters scattered, fleeing into the night. Artemis rushed to the boy's side. That's when she saw it. Her heart ached at the sight of his injuries and of Thalia's tears. "Percy," Artemis whispered. "Percy," Artemis said softly, kneeling beside him. "Stay with us. We're taking you back to our camp. I'll call for Apollo. He'll heal you, I promise." Percy managed a weak smile, his eyes closing as exhaustion overtook him. "I'll try. For you, Lady Artemis." Thalia's sobs grew louder, and she clung to Percy's hand, unwilling to let go. Artemis placed a reassuring hand on Thalia's shoulder, feeling a pang of sorrow for her lieutenant's grief. And for the first time in her life, she shed a tear for a man who was once a boy and had given her and her family everything he had to give and then more. "We need to move quickly," Artemis said, her voice steady. She ordered her Huntresses to carry the unconscious Percy on a makeshift gurney. They carried the boy back to camp and she called to her brother. Like always, he answered her instantly. When he saw Percy, a cry of rage slipped from his mouth. "Not again," he bellowed. He rushed to the demigod and placed his hand on his forehead. Then he said the only thing she'd never expect him to say. I can't heal him." Chapter 10. A Maiden's Camp. Artemis didn't know what to say. "What?" was all she could muster. Quiet and barely audible. Thalia sobbed and fell to her knees. Thunder rumbled as her anger was as tangible as the storm she summoned from her grief. "I can prevent his death. Heal his wound, but—" Apollo paled. She poisoned him with her darkness. It's the shadow of chaos. The original state the universe was in before the primordials were born. The same place Zeus had chained Hera. It eats your very essence. The amount within his spirit is in such a diluted state that he won't fade, but he will die. His body will wither, but at least his soul will remain intact. "At least," Thalia growled. Apollo looked up at her, his eyes were red, and he wore the face of Lester. When he felt anxious or powerless, he would subconsciously slip into that form. "You don't understand, Thalia. If you hadn't gotten to him when you did, he wouldn't have died. He would have faded. No afterlife, just nothingness. He would have ceased to exist. At least now, because of you, he'll have an afterlife," Thalia heaved. And Artemis knelt and hugged her friend. "How long does he have?" she found herself asking. "A year, 2 at most," Apollo responded. "Are you sure we can't do anything to save him?" she asked. "I don't know, Artie, but I won't stop looking until I've found something." He waved his hands over Percy, healing his wounds. "He'll wake in a couple of hours. He'll be incredibly weak for a while. He won't be able to defend himself for closer to weeks than days. I'm leaving. You'll take care of him while I'm gone." "Where are you going? And why can't we bring him to camp?" Apollo turned back to her, his form shifting back to his godly aspect. She had never seen him this serious before. "If he goes back there, they'll have him back hunting titans and giants within days, and do you think he'll say no?" Apollo almost yelled it. "He's to stay here. I'll tell Chiron and Will. They'll tell the rest. I'm also grounding them all. No more prophecies, no more quests, at least for the time being. Chiron, Dionysius, and I have been discussing it for a while. No more demigods are dying for Olympus's dereliction of duty." With that he vanished, leaving Artemis truly stunned. Chapter 11. 3 days later. Artemis observed the camp with a stern gaze, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Thalia had been neglecting her duties, something that would usually be unacceptable for any member of the hunt. Loyalty to Artemis was paramount, and distractions, especially those involving men, were not tolerated. Yet Thalia's unwavering attention to Percy was something Artemis found herself unable to criticize. Thalia sat by Percy's side, her fingers lightly brushing his arm, ensuring he was as comfortable as possible. His injuries were severe, and the poison coursing through his veins was something even Apollo had struggled to heal. Thalia's dedication was evident in the dark circles under her eyes, and the way she flinched at every sound, ever vigilant for any sign of danger or distress from Percy. Artemis couldn't deny the strange comfort she felt knowing that Thalia was there. She had always trusted her lieutenant implicitly, and Thalia's feelings for Percy were undeniably platonic. It was a bond forged in shared experiences and mutual respect, not romantic affection. This understanding allowed Artemis to permit Thalia's divided attention, even if it went against her usual expectations. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the camp, Artemis found herself drifting closer to where Percy lay. His face was pale, a stark contrast to his dark hair and the bruises marring his skin. He looked so different from the young demigod she first met. The boy who had faced impossible odds with unwavering determination was now a man bearing the weight of countless battles and losses. Artemis's thoughts wandered to Apollo's words. The poison was insidious, a fragment of chaos itself, threatening to erode Percy's very essence. It was a fate worse than death, and the knowledge that they had narrowly saved him from fading entirely was a small comfort. She found herself watching over him more often than she cared to admit, her presence a silent guardian in the night. Thalia looked up as Artemis approached, her eyes tired but resolute. "My lady," she said softly, inclining her head. "Thalia," Artemis replied, her voice gentler than usual. "How is he?" Thalia sighed, glancing at Percy. "Stable for now. Apollo's healing has helped, but he's still so weak. I can't leave him like this." Artemis nodded, understanding the unspoken plea in Thalia's words. "I know. You've done well, Thalia. Your loyalty to Percy is admirable, but remember your duties to the hunt." Thalia's eyes flashed with a hint of defiance, but she quickly tempered it with a deep breath. "I won't abandon him, my lady. He's done so much for all of us. I owe him this." Artemis placed a hand on Thalia's shoulder, a rare gesture of affection. "I understand. Just ensure you balance your responsibilities. The hunt needs you as much as Percy does." Thalia nodded, her resolve unwavering. "I will, Artemis. Thank you." As Artemis turned to leave, she cast one last glance at Percy. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, and for a moment she allowed herself to hope. Hope that Apollo would find a way to save him. Hope that Percy would survive this ordeal and find peace. Artemis knew that her own feelings were more complicated than she cared to admit. She respected Percy, admired his bravery and resilience, and perhaps, in some small way, she cared for him more than she should. It was a dangerous line to walk, but for now she would allow herself to walk it, if only to ensure his survival. As the night enveloped the camp, Artemis took her place among her hunters, her thoughts never straying far from the young man fighting for his life in the tent nearby. The bonds that tied them together were unseen but unbreakable. He held the sky for her. He had befriended her closest companion Zoe, and he was good, not just for a man, but for a person. Chapter 12. Awakening. Percy blinked groggily, his eyes adjusting to the soft light filtering through the fabric of the tent. His head throbbed, and every movement sent waves of pain coursing through his body. He tried to sit up, but a hand gently pressed against his chest, urging him to lie back down. "Take it easy, Percy," came a familiar voice. It was Artemis, her tone gentle yet firm. "What happened?" Percy managed to croak out, his throat dry and scratchy. Artemis sighed, her expression somber. "You were poisoned," she explained, "by the avatar of Nyx. You've been unconscious for 4 days. Percy's eyes widened in disbelief. 4 days? He had lost track of time completely. Memories of the ambush at the community college flooded back to him, followed by a sense of dread at the thought of what might have happened in his absence. "The others, are they okay?" Percy asked, his voice filled with concern. Artemis nodded reassuringly. "They're fine. Thalia and Apollo have been looking after you." Thalia stepped forward, her usually stoic expression softened with concern. "Hey, Percy," she said softly. "Good to see you awake." Percy managed a weak smile in return. "Thanks, Thalia. I owe you one." Artemis cleared her throat, drawing Percy's attention back to her. "There's something you need to know, Percy," she began, her voice grave. "You were poisoned with a substance known as chaos. It's eating away at your essence." Percy's heart sank at her words. He knew what she was about to say next, but he needed to hear it, needed to face the truth head on. "How long?" he asked quietly, bracing himself for the answer. Artemis hesitated, her expression pained. "A year, maybe 2 at most," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Percy closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like a heavy shroud. A year, maybe 2. It wasn't enough time, not nearly enough. Who will protect the campers? And wait, what about the quest? They could be in danger, they can't be out there without me. He tried to rise, but Thalia lightly pushed him back down. Apollo has grounded all demigods until further notice, she continued. No one will come to harm because of your inaction, Percy. Percy nodded, grateful for Apollo's intervention. He knew he couldn't bear the thought of anyone else getting hurt because of him. Then he slumped, loosing all his strength, knowing he didn't need it anymore now that his friends are safe. He allowed himself to grieve. My dad, Estelle, gods, my mother, what will I tell them? My mother has suffered enough heartache because of me, and Estelle. Oh, Estelle, I'll never see you grow up. Percy's voice broke then. Artemis reached out, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Percy and Thalia were both shocked. Artemis whispered to Percy, We won't let you die. I swear to you, I won't rest until you are healed and whole, and should the worst come to pass, I shall protect your family. I promise you this, Perseus. A single tear fell from Percy's eye as he said, Thank you, my lady of the moon. Artemis felt a blush creeping up her neck. You should rest, Percy, Thalia said gently, her hand resting on his arm. You're still weak, and you need time to recover. Percy nodded, allowing himself to sink back into the soft embrace of sleep. As his eyelids grew heavy, he couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the friends who stood by him. Artemis and Thalia watched over him for a few more minutes before leaving his tent. I noticed you chose your older form, Thalia said, grinning. My lady of the moon, she chuckled. Artemis scowled and said, Careful, sister, or I'll turn you into a jackalope. Thalia laughed and they returned to their separate roles within the hunt. Chapter 13. Outcast and Prisoner. It had taken another whole day before Percy could stand, and 2 more before he could help with chores around the camp. He had taken anything they could throw at him. Others may have been too proud to cook and clean, but Percy understands the privilege Lady Artemis has given him. Other than Apollo and that monster Orion, Percy was the only man to be allowed entry and refuge with the Hunters of Artemis. He was grateful, so he swallowed his pride and did not rise to the bait set for him. Each insult, each annoyed or disgusted look, the suspicions had been the hardest to stomach. It grated him that any demigod or mortal could think him a traitor or enemy to Olympus. Or worse, he was dangerous to the Huntresses and their patron. It was a tough 2 weeks, yet he never complained to Thalia or the Olympian. His pride would not let him, and he was the unwanted guest. They had all the right in the world to dislike him. This went on for weeks. Artemis avoided him, her short-lived concern for him replaced with dispassionate annoyance at his presence. She would just send him back to camp half-blood, but for the love she bore her annoying brother, she kept the son of Poseidon in her camp. She respected the boy well enough, but so many millennials spent hating men would not be undone so easily, if ever. She of course knew of her charge's actions against the hero, but she would not side with him against her own. I will protect him for my brother, but he doesn't need to be comfortable while he imposes himself upon my hunt. Phoebe had been the worst offender. She pranked Percy often, and the pranks were cruel. This went on for weeks, the hunter's scorn and the goddess's impassive disdain, until one fateful day one of the hunt's scouts had returned. Chapter 14. Revelations. A huntress named Hannah returned from scouting. The moment she saw Percy, she instantly recognized him. 3 years prior, he had saved her from a rough family life and 6 monsters. He'd never given her his name. Percy had taken her on a 2-week odyssey across the Midwest, trying to protect her. They had begun to learn more about each other when Percy realized Camp Half-Blood wouldn't be what was best for her. Hannah ran to Percy and gave him a bear hug, much to the shock of the other hunters. Phoebe, incredulous and slightly offended, stepped forward. "Hannah, why are you hugging a man?" Phoebe demanded. Her tone sharp and accusing. Hannah pulled away from Percy, turning to face her sisters with a fierce expression. "Do you know who this is? 3 years ago he saved me from a rough family life and 6 monsters. He protected me for 2 weeks, travelling across the Midwest to keep me safe. When he realised Camp Half-Blood wasn't the best place for me, he stopped our journey, took me to the edge of the woods, and lit a fire. He told me he would remain to ensure my safety, but would do so out of sight, as the people who would come wouldn't take kindly to his kind." The hunters listened in stunned silence as Hannah continued, her voice growing more impassioned. "He told me to pray to Artemis for protection, and left my side for the first time in 2 weeks. I did as he said, and you all found me. Once he knew I was safe, He continued on his way. Phoebe's expression softened slightly, but her skepticism remained. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Hannah glanced at Percy, then back at her sisters. "Because I never knew his name. He never gave it to me. I only recognized him now." The hunters murmured among themselves, their previous disdain for Percy wavering. Artemis, who had been silently observing the exchange, stepped forward. "Is what she said true?" Artemis asked, her voice soft but demanding. Percy nodded. "Yes, it's true, my lady." "Why did you do it?" Artemis questioned, her eyes piercing. Percy sighed, looking at the ground before meeting her gaze. "Because she needed help that I and Chiron could never give her. As I learned more about her and what kind of life she was forced to live, I knew what she needed." He looked up sharply. "I didn't take that choice from her, if that's what you're thinking. I offered to take her to camp, but I also asked if she would prefer a place devoid of men instead." Hannah smiled. "If I remember the question correctly, you asked me if I'd prefer an all-female boarding school, or a co-ed one." She giggled. "I told him that I'd prefer an all-female school, and that was that. He immediately left the path we'd been walking for 2 weeks and found the first real forest we could find. The rest you all know well." Artemis studied him for a long moment, her feelings a tumultuous mix. This man continued to defy her expectations, and it unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Chapter 15. Acceptance. The atmosphere around the camp began to shift subtly after Hannah's revelation. While the hunters were still wary of Percy, the outright hostility had faded. Artemis observed this change from a distance, noting how her charges seemed to grudgingly leave Percy in peace. The first signs of acceptance came in small, almost imperceptible ways. They stopped shooting him suspicious glares and ceased their whispered criticisms when he walked by. Days turned into weeks, and the hunters' interactions with Percy evolved. It started with casual avoidance, but soon curiosity overcame their reluctance. They began to ask him questions, cautiously at first, but then more openly. Percy's answers were always thoughtful and sincere, reflecting his experiences and the wisdom he'd gathered over his many quests. The hunters found themselves unexpectedly impressed by his humility and the depth of his knowledge. One afternoon, Phoebe approached Percy while he was helping set up camp. "You've been very critical of the Olympians in the past. Why?" she asked, her voice tinged with genuine curiosity. Percy paused, considering his response. "I think the gods are like us, in a way. They have their strengths and their flaws. They make mistakes, but they also have the power to do incredible good. It's a mixed bag. I see what gods like your lady are able to accomplish, and it makes me wish the others could follow suit. I know her domain gives her more freedom than most, but still I wish they'd learn more from their mistakes. It scares me to think what will happen to all my demigod brothers and sisters and to Olympus once I'm gone." Phoebe nodded thoughtfully. She'd expected a more simplistic view, but Percy's nuanced perspective made her reconsider her own biases, and it didn't hurt that he had complimented her mistress. Gradually the hunters began to include Percy in their activities. It started with small tasks and minor responsibilities, but soon enough he found himself participating in more significant ways. One morning Phoebe approached him with a serious expression. "Percy, we've been training hard for the past few days. Would you like to join us? We could use someone with your experience." Percy blinked in surprise, but quickly smiled. "I'd be honoured, but fair warning, I'm dreadful at archery." The Huntresses exchanged curious glances, and Phoebe raised an eyebrow. "How bad are we talking on?" Percy grinned, a playful glint in his eye. "I'm pretty sure I hold the camp record for the most missed shots in a single session. My aim is so bad I think my arrows may have been sprayed with target repellent or something." The hunters laughed, the tension melting away as Percy's self-deprecating humour broke down the last of their reservations. Phoebe smirked and shook her head. "Well, we can't have that. We'll teach you not to suck, son of Poseidon." "Please call me Percy," he had said. The Huntresses had smiled at that. Training with the hunters was both humbling and exhilarating for Percy. They were fierce and skilled warriors, their techniques honed to perfection under Artemis's guidance. Percy admired their dedication and discipline, striving to match their prowess. While his archery remained mediocre at best, his swordsmanship and battle instincts impressed even the most sceptical Huntresses. The turning point came during a particularly grueling training session. Percy had been paired with Phoebe, and despite his best efforts, she bested him in every round of archery, but he had her number when it came to the blade. Breathless and sweating, Percy finally raised his hands in mock surrender. "Call it a draw?" he had asked. Phoebe chuckled, wiping sweat from her brow. "You're not doing too bad for a mortal, but don't think we're going to go so easy on you next time." Percy's grin widened. "Wouldn't have it any other way." As the days passed, Percy's place in the camp solidified. The hunters no longer saw him as an intruder but as an ally, someone who could be trusted and relied upon. Artemis, too, found herself reassessing her initial judgment. Though she maintained a professional distance, she couldn't deny the positive influence Percy had on her huntresses. One evening, as the campfire crackled and the hunters shared stories of past exploits, Percy sat among them, feeling a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in a long time. Thalia, sitting beside him, nudged him with a smile. "Seems my sisters have learned to tolerate the company of a man," she laughed. "You've finally won them over, Seaweed Brain." Percy chuckled, looking around at the faces illuminated by the firelight. "Maybe, but I think I've learned just as much from them. I can even hit the target I'm aiming at now." Artemis watched from the edge of the camp, contemplative look in her eyes. Perhaps there was more to this son of Poseidon than she had initially thought. Chapter 16. Mutual Friend. The camp was quiet as the stars twinkled in the clear night sky. Artemis walked through the shadows, her keen eyes catching a familiar figure sitting at the edge of the camp. Percy was there again, as he had been every night since he arrived, staring up at the heavens. His sword Anaklusmos lay across his lap, and he carefully tended to its edge with a whetstone, the metallic sound blending with the soft murmurs of the night. Curiosity piqued, Artemis approached him silently, her presence almost ethereal in the moonlight. She had noticed this ritual of his, a nightly vigil spent caring for his weapon and gazing at the stars. Tonight, she decided to confront him about it. "Percy," she called softly, her voice breaking the stillness. Percy jolted slightly, then looked up to see Artemis standing there. He quickly averted his gaze, his face pale and tense. "Lady Artemis," he acknowledged with a nod, trying to mask his surprise. Artemis took a seat beside him, her silver eyes reflecting the starlight. "I've noticed you spend a considerable amount of time out here each night. What are you searching for in the stars?" Percy sighed deeply, his fingers pausing in their work on a Anaklusmos. "It's not so much searching as remembering," he said quietly, still avoiding her gaze. Artemis raised an eyebrow. "Remembering what?" He hesitated, then finally met her eyes. "Seeing you on Olympus reminded me of someone," he began, his voice tinged with sorrow. "It reminded me of Zoe." The name hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Artemis's eyes widened in surprise. "Zoe Nightshade?" Percy nodded, his expression pained. "I hadn't thought of her in years, and when I did, I felt this overwhelming sadness and shame. That's why I left so quickly. Since then, every night, I spent an hour caring for her blade and thinking of her while looking at her constellation." Artemis was stunned. She had not expected this. Zoe had been a cherished lieutenant, a steadfast companion for millennia. Her loss still resonated deeply within Artemis's immortal heart. For Percy to hold such a vigil spoke volumes of his character and the bonds he had forged with her oldest friend Zoe. After a moment of silence, Artemis finally found her voice. "It's your sword, Percy." Percy looked confused. "What?" "Anaklusmos," she clarified, her voice soft but firm. "She gave it to you. The sword is yours. That's what she would have wanted." A single tear traced its way down Percy's cheek, and for a moment Artemis saw not the powerful demigod, but the young boy who had once braved countless dangers. "So many are gone," he whispered, his voice breaking. They were the true heroes, Beckendorf, Selena, Jason, and Zoe. Artemis felt a pang of empathy. She reached out and placed a comforting hand on Percy's shoulder. "They were all heroes, Percy, and so were you. Zoe trusted you with her blade because she saw the hero in you, just as the rest of us do." Percy bowed his head, overcome with emotion. Just feels like I could have done more, saved more of them. You did everything you could, Artemis said firmly. Her face was stern. You're too hard on yourself. Your selflessness does you credit, hero, but I will not hear you disparage yourself. It isn't what any of your fallen friends would have wanted. Zoe had a hard life, but a good one, and I'm glad she befriended you, Perseus. Percy's face darkened, a flicker of anger crossing his features. I wished I had been with Jason when he and Piper met Hercules, he muttered. But it was probably for the best that I wasn't. I don't think I could have held my temper. Artemis felt a surge of understanding. Hercules had been a sore subject for many who knew the true stories behind his legend, especially for Zoe and her companions. Hercules had his flaws, she said quietly. More than most realize. They sat in silence for a while, the stars above them a silent witness to their shared grief and respect for the fallen. Eventually, Percy looked up, his eyes reflecting a new resolve. Thank you, Lady Artemis. Artemis nodded, standing up and leaving. As she did, she turned and said, Be well, Percy, and please get some rest. Apollo would never forgive me if something happened to you. And fates forgive me, she thought. Neither would I. Percy stood, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. As they walked back to the camp together, he felt a sense of peace settle over him, knowing that Zoe's legacy lived on not just in the stars, but in the very sword he carried and the memories those who loved her still cherished.